Good morning, candidates for Glenview District 34 School Board. My name is Lynette Foss. I'm from the League of Women Voters in Lake Forest and Lake Bluff, and I will be your moderator today. We will begin with our 2-minute opening statements in the order of names that were drawn before we started here today. So we're going to ask Ms. Katie Jones to open for us. You have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon. First, I would like to thank the League of Women Voters for giving us the opportunity to speak before a broader audience and to learn more about each one of us. I am finishing my first term on the District 34 Board of Education, and besides the 4 years of experience that I bring to this seat, I believe that I offer a unique perspective as a former public educator. More so, I taught in District 225 for 11 years, and I am very familiar with the requirements and skills that we want to see our children achieve as they enter into high school. I believe that I can help make that transition a more seamless one. In addition to teaching and understanding adolescents, I also represent the portion of the community that has very young children. And as we know, and has become more pronounced with COVID, our youngest learners have different needs than our older ones. And the challenges that exist for each age group are different. As a mother of a 3 and a 6-year-old, and as someone who has an undergrad concentration in child development, I believe that I can effectively advocate for the needs of this age group. I hope to make full day kindergarten a reality for District 34, a much needed program for our community, especially our low income, special needs, and EL students. I consider myself to be a team player. Our current board members have worked very well with one another, especially this year during very trying times. And although we have had our differences, we all respect those differences and appreciate the diversity of our experiences and our opinions. I am seeking re-election as I feel I can continue to have a positive impact on the direction of this district, and I want to continue my efforts to be the voice for our children. I have and will always continue to do my best to represent all constituents, including our teachers, our parents, and our community, but the children will always be at the forefront of my decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Dr. Dolan, you're next.
Morning, and thank you, Lynette, and thank you to the League for setting this up for us to enable our ability to engage a community in a otherwise virtual forum. Just to start a little bit on my background, I greatly benefited from the public school system here in Glenview through both District 34 and District 225. My family moved to the Glenview area 30 years ago, and I truly value both the quality and the excellence and the experience, particularly with the diversity of our community. And I certainly want to make sure that my voice and my contributions are going to be focused on that diversity and that opportunity for my children. I'm the father of 5. I have a 3rd grader, 2 first grade boys, and 2 soon-to-be kindergartners, all of which have different needs. And the varied needs don't just mean academic, but social and mental as well. I certainly don't envy the Herculean task that the current board members have faced in the last year or 18 months, particularly with respect to the challenges of something that had transitioned from a otherwise tabletop exercise to reality. And the lasting impact of this pandemic is one of the greatest challenges we will face as a community, not just this year, but for years to come. I saw this as an opportunity to get involved and contribute to my community, to be a voice, not just of my friends and families or offer my opinion, but to ask the questions that can enable us as a community to go forward and represent the entirety of District 34. I look forward to the questions and the responses, and I really appreciate, again, the opportunity to share some of these perspectives as we go forward.
Thank you very much. Mr. Baumstark, you're next.
Good morning, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for the opportunity to participate in this forum. First, I would just like to briefly introduce myself. I'm Jim Baumstark, and I'm a 20-year Glenview resident. I'm married with 2 children. Their ages 17 and 19, both of which are D34 alums. Professionally, I recently became, as in the beginning of this year, a high school administrator. I'm the director of finance and operations at a local private high school. For the 9 years prior to that, I was a high school teacher in math and economics, and I still may actually maintain some of those teaching responsibilities today. But prior to becoming that teacher, that was a career change. I spent 20 years in corporate America as a finance executive and actuary, working in areas such as insurance, benefits, investments, and risk management. Second, I'd just like to share a little bit about why I want to continue my service on the board. First, I'm just passionate about education. Hopefully that's clear from the career change I made from corporate America 10 years ago. Second, I love Glenview. I've always found ways to be invested in our community. As you know, I'm currently the vice president of the school board, and I've served in many other capacities throughout Glenview, including 8 years on the Glenview Education Foundation, 4 of which were on the executive team and 1 as president. Third, I think my diverse and relevant professional and leadership background can add value to our board and to the community. And finally, I really just want to oversee the completion of several key initiatives that we initiated during the first 4 years of my current term. We adopted a new strategic plan. We launched an 8-school building renovation via referendum, initiated a plan for full-day kindergarten, and of course, we need to continue to manage the pandemic learning and ongoing impacts. I feel like that's all unfinished business that I'd like to be part of seeing the completion of. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stefani, you're next.
Thank you. I wanted to also thank the League of Women Voters for having us this morning or I should say this early afternoon, so that we have an opportunity to talk to everybody and explain what it is that we can bring to the board in the next 4 years. My name is Diane Stefani. I moved to Glenview in 2003. I grew up about 6 miles from here in Norwood Park on the edge of Chicago. I have 1 student currently in the District 34 schools, a 7th grader at Atia, and I have a 2nd student currently at GBS. To people who know me, I am a baseball mom and an orchestra mom. For the past 3.5 years, I've been privileged to serve my community as a member of the Board of Education. We have dealt with various interesting decisions as well as some unexpected challenges. I'm very fortunate, however, that I would echo some of the thoughts that have already been expressed here, that I work with a board full of members who respect one another, even when we don't agree with one another. I think if anyone really knows the board members, we really don't always think alike. We're quite different. We're all quite opinionated, yet somehow we're able to come together and make good cohesive decisions and support one another in those decisions. And I think this is a strength of the current board. Even when we disagree, we come to consensus. While my children are in school, I also work as an attorney in private practice. I've represented various defendants, including schools, teachers, and principals. I've also represented physicians, hospitals, and done some toxic tort work. Really, I ask questions for a living, and I think that helps me on the board because I oftentimes come up with questions for our superintendent, questions that need to be looked into. My interest in schools started early. I come from a family of teachers. So I was born actually to a 2nd grade teacher, and my mom was a teacher before she retired. My grandmother was a teacher. My aunt and uncle are teachers. My cousin's a teacher. I think you get the idea. I wanted to be different, so I decided to go into law. Now I have done some work representing teachers in schools. I don't come here today with any agenda. I just have a willingness to serve my community if the community feels that I could be helpful. I do love Glenview. I think that that's one of the reasons I want to continue serving. We have started some very exciting. Thank you.
All right, and now on to the questions portion of the program. We'll start in the same order in which you introduced yourselves, and then we'll move to the next candidate when we begin questioning after that. The first question has to do with teacher shortage. Illinois, like the United States overall, faces an increasing shortage of certified and experienced teachers. What strategies do you think the district should employ to secure a full staff of quality instructors? Ms. Jones?
So we experienced in Illinois the same thing in the early 70s, and we had a massive teacher shortage then. And I know firsthand because both of my parents are former teachers and started in the 70s, and there was multiple incentives from the state drawn up in order to entice young individuals to go into the teaching profession. I'm not necessarily confident that the state is in a position to be able to do that at this point. So in terms of the district, I know that in our last contract negotiations, we actually made it more enticing for the younger teachers in terms of salary and benefits to come to District 34 without obviously compromising that of our veteran teachers. But we do know and we appreciate the fact that we need to stand out and draw some of the best teachers possible. And since there is a shortage, we kind of had the foresight to be able to say, let's go ahead and make sure that this is part of the contract now, so that as we move forward the next 3 years, we can draw some of those younger and also very high quality teachers into District 34.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Dr. Dolan?
Sure. This is a great question, and it's not dissimilar to healthcare shortages or other like highly skilled required industries. I think there's a couple things that we can both learn from and take away from the last year and apply, as well as think about things perhaps in a little bit of a different way. The first thing I think we can take away is the ability to leverage technology to enable the learning in a, we'll call it less centralized and potentially decentralized capacity. Our learners across all of our age groups and cohorts adapted to technology requirements differently. One of my first graders apparently is now like IT tech support for his virtual classroom, which is phenomenal. I think there's a way to see how we can do that. The different approach that might be an opportunity is identifying strategic partnerships with local education and sort of development training academic programs to facilitate feedership of those qualified recent graduates into that early career as a choice. Much like Katie said, I know that the last negotiation with the teachers union did address some of that attractiveness from a compensation and benefits standpoint. And I think that's an opportunity to continue to fill the funnel, if you will, in terms of qualified professionals through a strategic partnership that feeds into the district.
Thank you, Dr. Dolan. Mr. Baumstark?
Well, I teach economics, and really it becomes down to an economic issue of how do you put the right incentives in place. Clearly, if it's a huge macroeconomic issue across the state, I do agree that we want to at least look into and have communities lobby the government for potential help with a solution like this. But if that doesn't materialize to solve the problem globally, I think it comes down to kind of the micro incentives. Katie mentioned one of them already that can be addressed through pay and benefits and making sure we have the right scales. We took some great steps toward that in this last negotiation, but that's something we'll need to keep our mind or our eye on in the next negotiation that comes up in the next 4 years to make sure that the pay and benefits scale. But I think incentives goes beyond pay. I think it also goes beyond just the culture of the district and having a teaching environment that is desirable to be in from a professional development perspective and things like that. And so I think that's another place where we need to have our focus. So to make sure that teachers want to come to Glenview, not simply because of the pay and benefits, but because of the development and teaching opportunity that it affords to teach our children.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Stefani.
I would echo a lot of what others have already said. I think that one thing that is important as well is that we make ourselves a destination district, that we continue to work on that. We need to make ourselves or continue to make ourselves, because I think we're already on that path, to be a place that is attractive to be for teachers. Ways we can do that is demonstrate continuous respect and a spirit of collaboration with the teachers. I think that this last year has been particularly difficult on teachers. And I think that we need to work to make sure that the teachers do feel appreciated going forward, that we communicate that respect. We also need to collaborate with them because they're going to be very important partners in making sure that our students are taken care of in the next several years. So I agree, incentives are needed, and we need to make sure that we're competitive as a district. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question has to do with mitigating the impact on academic progress due to the pandemic. What should the district do to address any loss in student learning and development because of the pandemic? Dr. Dolan, we'll start with you on this one.
Great. So I think the first question is, has there been loss? Or asked another way, what has the loss been? And I think that's where the last part of that question alludes and potentially should be taken from. It goes without saying, as several of us are parents of active students within the district, that our young learners have been impacted. It's very difficult to understand and benchmark where do they stand relative to their peers And that's going to be the first challenge. But I would challenge to say that we're not where we need to be. I would want to make sure that for those who maybe were differentially impacted, there are ways that the district can identify those and enable a response. But I also want to make sure that we're not looking back in a negative way and say that the district didn't do great things. I think it's very important to acknowledge that everybody was doing the best that they could with the information that they had available at the time. And I think we can challenge ourselves to look at the past year as both a challenge and coming out of it as a success, and looking forward, say, how do we address the needs of each of the different students differentially, using the tools that we've adapted, using the learnings and the expanded capabilities that our teachers now have as a response to the pandemic to meet the needs of a virtual learning environment, and recognize the adaptability of our students and the children and adapting to those different learning platforms to see how they can advance, even if they are where they need to be to continue to excel, and those that need a different or a catch up, that we support them through the additional resourcing.
Thank you. Mr. Baumstark.
Well, first I concur with what James said about collecting the data. I feel like, as I'm a real data-driven person myself, and I think that's step one, is to really understand the scope and nature of the impacts. What demographic groups maybe have been impacted more or less, because different demographic groups have different financial resources to have dealt through this pandemic. So that would be the first priority in my mind, is to measure and assess. Some possible ways to some mitigation programs would be maybe to, even in this summer, see if we can leverage some summer enrichment programs that could be used to help set students up for success coming into the coming year. And also, now that we have some comfort with sort of remote learning technology, maybe there's a way to use some of that on a supplemental basis. So we're still in full-time school, but maybe like in the evenings or on weekends, there's a way to use that technology for teachers to help do some supplemental, because it's not as big of a burden to have to come to a school in the evenings or something like that. Technology makes it more quick to assess. And also, I think the other impact that we need to be mindful of is the social emotional impacts on children. And I think an important thing there would be actually to have some professional development for all teachers, because they'll be our first line of defense in trying to diagnose that. And so I think having all teachers go through some professional development to help be extra sensitive to understanding and seeing those issues as they arise would be an important step as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stefani.
Thank you. This is a great question. It's actually something extremely timely, because I think it's something that many members of the board, including myself, have recently actually asked about. How are we going to address those gaps that students may have? And I think that James and Jim have already spoken to the fact that some of that's going to come from assessment. We're going to have to perceive where those learning gaps exist. This is also where our very gifted teachers are very important, and where we're going to have to partner with them to make sure that they can help us identify those gaps. I know that just knowing some of my children's teachers, having had one that's already graduated and having one that's already in 7th grade, I know that teachers are paying attention to those things, and that they are probably more aware of where they're seeing shortfalls in student knowledge than anyone. So I think that going forward, we know that the administration is trying to make plans for the summer. We're going to have to do that into the school year. So, the social emotional needs are going to be so crucial moving forward as well. We're going to have to make sure that those their staff is very attuned to what students might be going through. We have to make sure that our staff has social emotional support as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Jones.
Thank you. So speaking first regarding the academics, our district is very diverse, as been alluded to, both with ethnicity and social economics. We have had families that have been able to afford tutors, enrichment classes, supplemental activities due to in-person lost class time. However, we have 25% of our district, last I knew, and I said that might have changed since the pandemic, it might be even greater, that are considered low income. And those students have not had that opportunity. We have had an achievement gap that has been in existence. I believe it's going to be larger, and I don't want to see those children fall through the cracks. So some of the things that I've said and proposed, similar to what I will echo Jim on the summer school, but I would like to see some before and after school opportunities, maybe some weekend opportunities, and for our low income at either no or low cost to them. And I also think that we need to take advantage of our wonderful educated community members, because I think there's many people that would volunteer their time to help bridge that gap. And the saying, it takes a village, I think in this case, it really does. And I think people would be willing to step up to help as well. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question has to do with priorities for the pandemic relief funds. The district is expected to receive over $1,400,000 in pandemic relief funds from the federal government. How do you anticipate these monies will be spent, and what do you think the priorities should be? This one will go first to Mr. Baumstark.
Well, so the CARES Act money you just referred to, and I think we're expecting additional funds under the recently passed American Rescue Plan legislation. And having worked with our district finance team, our understanding is that we've incurred pandemic costs in the district, extra personnel, PPE, and whatnot. And our expectation is that the pandemic relief funds will just about offset the additional pandemic spending. So in my mind, that's really what the priority is to use those funds to spend on what we've incurred so that we don't actually have a hit to our operating budget because of the pandemic, which is a great position to be in given how the nature of the pandemic. To the extent that there'd be any excess funds from pandemic funding, I think we would want to use them to these things like assessing where we're at and potentially developing of these restore kind of programs. But to me, the first priority is to make sure that we don't have a hit to our operating budget from pandemic spending that's already occurred. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stefani.
Thank you. So, I completely agree with everything Jim just said. I mean, I think that one thing that is a little confusing with all of this is that we see that we are receiving money, right? So it looks like a windfall. However, if we go back and we look at spending, the district had spent a lot of money prior to, because of needs to adapt and change and make its schools ready for pandemic concerns. We had already spent quite a bit of the money before it was received. The good news is because there is more funding expected, it looks as though there won't be possibly as big of a shortfall as we might have feared. But we're going to have to definitely do some careful management, as Jim had alluded to make certain going forward that we don't fall into a problem. Because, as I don't think we've talked about this too much yet, we just passed a huge referendum, a very huge referendum, which was a big ask for the community. So going forward, to make sure that we don't have to make any cutbacks, and those cutbacks, we certainly don't want to see those ever affect students. But as we make careful planning going forward, we have to make sure that we're careful with money so that we don't run into problems. It's going to take a lot of careful planning. There's probably going to be some difficult choices ahead. But I think our administration is very good at finding where we can find savings, and having a strong administration is key also. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Jones.
So I would echo what Jim and Diane said as well. And I know we recently received updates actually today that looked like, based on the money that we received, the money that we've the expenditures related to the pandemic, it looks like it's a wash in terms of what we're getting and what we've spent and what is projected. I would agree with Jim that anything extra and above definitely needs to go towards the restore aspect of it, and the helping with whatever we can get out of any type of assessments in terms of bridging those gaps. And I would also like just to kind of point out that Diane alluded to the referendum. I think it's important too that voters understand that all the referendum money that we have is for that of the referendum projects. So we can't and wouldn't use referendum money to put towards anything related to the pandemic or otherwise. I think there's a misconception sometimes there that people need to understand that it's a completely separate entity. But yeah, I would say that right now it looks like we're in great shape in terms of any deficits. It doesn't look like we're going to have one. So thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Dolan.
This is, I'll say, just great news, I think, for the community. And it's breaking news as far as I'm aware. So thanks for sharing, Jim, Diane, and Katie. The fact that we're able to have those federal dollars allocated that offset any of the commitments that the district made in response to the pandemic is really fortunate. If there is an excess, I'm also fully aligned to use those monies to think through how do we facilitate and meet the needs of all of those across our community, particularly the teachers. If there's any sort of supplemental training, as Jim alluded to, with respect to mental health, the supplemental programs, as Katie and others have mentioned, with respect to summer programs, weekend programs, because that's not just going to be a program stand up, but it's also going to require the professionals and educated commitment of our teachers and teaching staff, which is another line item. And the one thing I would just want to flag to not lose sight of is that, yes, the president has made some phenomenal goals that we will be independent from the pandemic by July 4th. But I want to just frame that the virus is not going away as of July 4th. There still runs the risk of escape variants. There still runs the risk of a seasonal situation that will be afflicting the US and globally because of the vaccine supply and administration requirements, that we may want to use some of those monies to do some scenario planning for the fall and beyond, so we don't find ourselves in another situation like we are today, having to go into an adapted pause or moving into a virtual environment. We can take those steps now to think through that later.
Thank you. Our next question has to do with decision factors for in-person learning during the pandemic. We've seen some other districts successfully return to full-time in-person learning. What is different about District 34 that has delayed reopening? And what are 3 key pieces of information that would impact your decision as a school board member about whether to keep the schools open for in-person learning? This one goes to Ms. Stefani first.
Thank you. It's a really great question. What's unique about our district is that heading into the pandemic, we had just had a huge referendum, very big ask from our community. I alluded to that in one of my other responses. This referendum, though, came about partially due to space issues, and that's very key. And that's made some of the considerations we've had to have in terms of having students and teachers in buildings is just safety. There were many families that complained before the referendum that our classrooms were too crowded. Although the referendum was approved, which is great news for the future, we are still working with these old school buildings, with these old setups. So the fact that we're working with older buildings with acknowledged space issues has meant that we've had some serious challenges with the COVID instruction planning. Teachers have had to be constantly adapting. In terms of things that I think, we'll need to look at going forward is, we have just, unlike a lot of other districts, we actually do have a plan as of April 7th to have our kids go back. And we are going to have to use less than 6-foot distance in all likelihood, we've discovered. Most of our teachers are vaccinated at this point, as of this morning in our status update. I think we have about 100 that are still waiting to start their vaccines. So we're doing very well there. We're going to have to watch out for variants going forward. We're going to have to watch out for how we can adapt this very small classrooms that we have. And maybe, some of these new changes that'll be coming about as we go forward with the construction, we'll be able to actually adapt to meet the needs, because as James alluded to, I very much agree. I don't think this pandemic's over. I think there's going to be waves of this that we see in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jones.
So again, I won't reiterate, but as Diane pointed out, our district is much larger. We have larger class sizes, which made it more difficult in order to abide by the CDC guidelines with the 6-foot distance. So we obviously have had a little bit more to deal with on that sense than some of the other surrounding districts. I will say that the one thing that I was very vocal about and continued to be vocal about was our youngest learners. I felt that they really needed to be in person for a variety of reasons. And I felt that as a district, we could have done a better job, at least, of getting our kindergarten, first grader, second graders in person for a greater amount of time from the beginning by being able to spread across not just necessarily one of our buildings. And in terms of 3 pieces of information to move forward into in-person, I think now with the new CDC guidelines, with community transmission, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of people were very happy to see that. I know that that's what we've been going off of, is the community transmission in terms of what's going on here and how it translates into our schools. So I know we're going to continue to follow that. And also the vaccinations of our teachers, which I know Diane had mentioned already. So we're close to having all of our teachers, bus drivers, and associate staff members vaccinated as well. So those would be the pieces that need to be monitored moving forward.
Thank you. Dr. Dolan.
Thanks. I think this is a great question, and I certainly appreciate how, Diane and Katie have identified already up front that the space limitations are a key consideration when it comes to infectious disease and trying to maintain the health and safety of our community. We didn't know a whole lot a year ago. This was a new virus. There was no natural history. And what was emerging about the virus at the time highlighted that there were multi-system inflammatory syndromes and impacts, especially for young people, that were very aberrant relative to the elderly with comorbidities or living in nursing homes. That alone highlighted, I think, a conservative posture, which I laud the board and the administration for assuming, even at the expense of, a traditional learning environment. Since then, we've learned a ton. And when schools were thought to be potentially spreaders, even for kids who to be asymptomatic and infectious, that is shown to not be the case based on really good epidemiology work and publications that highlight, unless there's active community spread ongoing at a high threshold, schools are safe. The ability to meet those needs because of monitoring the area around us, the teacher willingness and engagement to be vaccinated is a phenomenal threshold to achieve. And lastly, I think the understanding what the safety and the risk are within our community and defining how to be safe and healthy and teaching those public health practices from all of our willing educators, support staff, and even down to our students is the 3 pieces of information.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Baumstark.
I guess the first thing I'd like to say is the premise of the question assumed that, we were delayed versus sort of the broader set of schools. And I guess I would probably actually just challenge that a little bit. Yes, we could certainly find individual schools that did something different than us in a more accelerated time frame, but we had a 4-point plan that allowed us to move between fully in person from fully remote during the course of the school year. We'll have been in all 4 of those modes. We've had children in person to some level really since September, other than that adaptive pause that shut down all schools during the holiday season. So do I wish we could transition between these things faster? But yes, the district's very large. It's 8 schools. It's hard. It's kind of like driving a battleship. And so one thing I wish we could do differently is have the flexibility to move more quickly between these phases. But I think having that plan to have the ability to move, it was definitely an important thing. In terms of the things I look at, people have mentioned most of them now, but like, why is it safe now? Yes, the community transmission rates have dropped a lot. Same with the hospitalization and ICU metrics. We have the new guidance on social distancing. That's a game changer for us, given our older schools with confined space to be able to go to 3 feet. The vaccine ability. Weather is a factor too. At least for the start of remainder of the year, the fact that more outdoors and weather seems to be a factor. This seems like the right time to be making a decision to have all learners come fully in person to the extent they would like to.
Thank you. On to the next question. This one has to do with the district's financial deterioration forecast. The most recent financial forecast indicates a deteriorating financial position for the district over the next 5 years. What actions should the district consider now to mitigate the projected deficits? This one goes back to Ms. Jones first.
So we were asked this in a forum yesterday, and the one thing that we pointed out was that over the 4 years that the 3 of us have been on the board, we've had projected deficits come in and out. And at one point, actually, it was fairly large. But there also is a lot of variables in terms of money that comes into the district also, that some it can be completely off based on, again, other variables such as new property value, new property taxes, et cetera. And the one thing that we've been so great, and this is on our administration, they've been wonderful at being able to find efficiencies to cut money certain places, reallocate it, but all without really impacting directly our students. So as we move forward, we're going to have to take each year case by case and look at our projected deficits and our expenditures. We're going to have to be very careful with how we spend our money and keep a watchful eye. But more importantly, and most importantly, we need to make sure that whatever we do doesn't directly impact our students. Thank you.
Dr. Dolan.
This, as Katie said, this was a question we were answering yesterday, and in that forum, I had an opportunity to hear all of the praise for the administration in terms of being able to reasonably and rationally meet the needs of the budget without compromising the experience of the students and teachers. And I think that's an encouraging posture to take, and I think that's going to be really the stewardship needed to facilitate the continued sort of financial health of the district, to deliver the excellent experience and quality of education that we expect of the district, and to kind of meet, when we think about the community expectations, that there is the use of the financial resources in a very meaningful way that is equitable across all of the schools within the district. And it's not just going to be allocated to one school or another. So to be able to have that conversation and engage the administration very actively is really the responsibility of the board on behalf of the community. And I can say nothing but being that I'm encouraged to hear that is the approach and the posture, particularly with respect to how the community are engaged in the financial reconciliation, the financial projections, and the communication around those financial projections, such that decisions can be made prospectively as opposed to reactively.
Thank you. Mr. Baumstark.
This kind of might sound like a finance guy answer to the question, but like when we look at those projections, one thing that we do note is that they are pretty sensitive to small changes and assumptions. And maybe that's just a way of reiterating what Katie just said, that I believe it's this idea that small changes can help address anything that's structurally emerging. Like there's reason to believe that it can be managed in the way that we've just described, with continuous improvement and efficiencies. Those projected deficits, even though they're not so large that they feel like they're insurmountable through continuous improvement and change. One thing I'd also like to point out is that our district is quite financially strong. We have a strong reserve that can cover many years of deficits if necessary. So not that that's what the goal of that is. We don't want to have permanent deficit spending, but I think what I think that allows us is it gives us the flexibility to not have to make any decisions in panic mode. We have the flexibility and financial strength to be thoughtful and make changes and make decisions without impacting learning for kids, and have appropriate timeframes for implementation.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Stefani.
I think everyone before me has made excellent points. I think one thing that people have to, when you hear financial deterioration, that sounds very ominous. But I think that one thing the community needs to keep in mind is that the school board has a long history, and we can thank the members that came before us, of being very responsible with finances. We have a great administration that has consistently helped us avoid deficits. And as Katie alluded to, and as Jim alluded to, we've been able to find ways, working with the administration, to avoid these problems. And I'm very confident that this is not something that's going to sneak up on us. It's something that we're aware that we're going to have to use some careful planning going in. We knew that when we did a referendum that was as large as it turned out to be, that there were going to be some possibly lean times. And by that, I just simply mean we were going to have to be very financially responsible going forward. I agree with Katie's point that we have to make certain that this does not impact the students to whatever extent possible. If we can make the shifts not impact them, that would be the optimal situation. Also, we have been in this situation before as a parent that's been in this district for a long time. So this is not something that's insurmountable at all. I think these are problems that we can tackle. Thank you. I can't hear you.
I muted my dog. The next
Hear you for a
question
second.
has to be, next question has to be about community input. Explain your views on what you think is the best way to involve parents and other stakeholders in the school board decision-making process. In other words, what do you think could be done differently to involve parents and other stakeholders in school board decisions, as well as the planning and implementation of school policies? This one goes to Dr. Dolan first.
Thank you, Lynette. I think this is a great question. It's clear that our community and how they are engaged in the school board is not going to potentially be the same as it was a year ago. And I see that as a real opportunity. I think community input through multiple different channels, and whether it's our current types of methodologies like surveys and soliciting emails is great. I do think that there is an opportunity to get a little bit more grassroots. One of the areas that I see as an opportunity, especially, is to engage those that are not as overtly vocal, particularly in a public space. We have 62 different languages spoken in our district. I think that itself highlights the need to actually do a little bit of community engagement and ensure that we have a representative voice and sample across the varied, diverse communities that are in District 34. And whether it's establishing community leadership and liaisons, if it's multi-channel market research, the only way that we can really represent the diversity of our community and the needs or unmet needs that are going to drive board decisions is through information. It's through asking questions. It's not through assuming that any of the individual board members is representative of a whole swath and has the answer at the outset. I see that as a tremendous opportunity, especially virtually. It's hard to do 7:30 Monday meetings when you're trying to put kids to bed. And I can tell you right now, I look forward to participating, whether I'm on the board or not, because I believe that a virtual platform is a way to engage the community.
Thank you. Mr. Baumstark.
First, I maybe just want to point out or just say, like, in sort of my philosophy on being on the board is that I feel like it's important that we, as a board member, factor in the voices from all the constituents that are involved. Certainly the community is a big one, parents are a big one, students are probably the most important one, but also teachers and administration. So like that's one thing I think we're asked to do as a board members, to be able to kind of wear all those hats and factor all those perspectives into any decisions we might make. James kind of hit the nail on the head with what I felt like I wanted to say too, is that I think what this pandemic we've certainly heard a lot of, I'll call them the voices that are willing to speak up and want to be loud. We've heard a lot of that, but what I don't know that we've heard is sort of the voices that just that don't feel like they want to speak up. And so I think we need to be much more purposeful in trying to understand those perspectives going forward. And I think these virtual tools give us a lot of ways to do that. I think what we did for the referendum can also be a great model. And that was the referendum was, we actually were advised like you'll never get it passed, but we did a lot of community sessions, community engagements, reached out, had lots of forum where the school and the board sought input, and we had the most successful passage of a referendum ever. So I feel like that's a model for how we might want to think about other major decisions going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stefani.
Thank you. So this is where my time as having been involved with the district for a bit of a while kind of plays in. When I first started out being involved, it was simply as a kindergarten mom. I went to the schools and I would work with other parents that also wanted to volunteer, and we would read to the kids. And we were reading to kindergartners. Some of them couldn't read, some of them could, but we would have that experience. We'd listen to one another and about our concerns that we had for our kids. That early interest led to me being involved as a liaison to the board. That liaison role led me to be interested to work with the board. But I've heard through time a variety of ways for the board to get feedback. And I think the most organic is we just simply listen to one another, and we do have people speaking to us constantly. But I've also seen us try a variety of ways to get some community input. And we've done it through surveys, community outreach. Some of them have been more effective than others. As Jim already alluded to, I would agree with him that, at times I worry as though we don't hear enough from some portions of the community. And, some of those are the ones that may not feel as comfortable with the language, and it's very important for us to hear from everybody. So I think we need to continue to do more community outreach. I know that we've expanded our publications and all of our pieces that go out to parents to make certain that they're in more languages. I think pieces like that would be very important to make certain that more parents are able to communicate their ideas to us, because that's a very vital portion of us understanding what it is that we want to take as a direction going forward.
Thank you. Ms. Jones.
Community input is essential, in my opinion, for a highly functioning board. And the 7 of us represent the community. So that is all aspects of the community, from simply the taxpayer with no children in the district, to the teachers, to the students. And I think it's important, as we've seen this year, a lot more people got involved because of the situation and because they could. I think that, as James mentioned, I think Zooming the meetings for the public is a nice benefit. I personally think that the board themselves need to meet in person because it's a lot easier to have discussion. But I do think having that opportunity for other people who can't get there to be able to view and participate. In addition to that, I would love to see small groups of the community get together for things like coffee with a couple of the board members moving forward, and having kind of a coffee talk, or however you want to call it, to hear kind of the most pressing issues on their minds or their concerns, because those people might be more willing to sit down with a small group of people than a large platform, either at a board meeting or on Zoom, where they have to speak publicly in front of many people. So I would like to see some opportunities like that moving forward as well.
Thank you. I believe we're approaching our last question for today before you make your closing statements. This one will go to Mr. Baumstark first, and then we'll continue through the order. And this has to do with the top priorities for the district. What do you view as the top priorities for the district in the coming term, and how can they be effectively addressed or accomplished?
But I see that there's kind of five key priorities. The first one is really to manage through the pandemic and ensure that our schools can operate in person and as safely as possible, starting with the spring, but then we have to keep our eye on the prize for the fall and make sure that we stay in that mode of in-person learning. The second piece is, I call it the assess and restore aspect of pandemic learning. And we've talked about this earlier in some of the earlier questions. Priority needs to be like, where are we at with academically and social emotionally, and then we talked about some of the various solutions there. Third, we talked about the referendum today. Overseeing, that's going to be a huge construction project over the next 4 years. Overseeing the successful implementation of that is an important priority. The space expansion associated with that is going to enable the full day kindergarten program that needs to be launched in the next 4 years. That's another important priority over the next that time. And we also have a strategic plan that we put in place 4 years ago. It's been kind of, we've hit the pause button on it because of pandemic learning, but we need to turn our attention to that and fit that in as we can as well. And so that just the way we focus on that is have that be the focus of our board discussions, right? That's what gets attention, is to make sure that those things are the agenda and debated and decided on and evaluated and assessed. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stefani.
Thank you. Oh boy, Jim, you said a lot of what I wanted to say. I echo everything that Jim just said, but in addition to that, just to kind of elaborate on that a little bit, I think that what we hope to do going forward is to make sure that we implement the referendum well. I mean, that's what we're doing. We're in the process of planning, and that's something that's been very important to a lot of us. We want to see that moving forward. In addition to that, we hope to get out of panic mode. I mean, because I think a lot of us have been operating from this, as James alluded to earlier, a lot of us have been operating from this mode of trying to understand COVID and trying to understand how to operate in this world. I'm hoping that we get to move beyond that and move into a post-pandemic world. Hopefully we can shift into a little less focus on a health crisis. So doing that, as Jim already alluded to, I would agree with him that we do have a strategic plan in place, and that strategic plan gives us very much kind of a framework of what our priorities should be. We're going to be focusing on our goals of student success and well-being, educator growth and support, parent and community partnerships, and resource stewardship. And those are the most important things, hopefully, if we can move past this pandemic world. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Jones.
So first and foremost, we're trying to bring our teachers and our students back to our buildings full time. We're also trying to get all of our staff vaccinated, as we said. So these two things are obviously our top priority to be able to move forward. But in addition to that, we are in year 2 of a 5-year strategic plan, and encompassed was that was the referendum. So we are simultaneously trying to move forward from the pandemic and get kids and teachers back into the buildings while making sure that everything is moving forward with the construction of our 8 buildings, and that everything stays on track. I will say that, we've kind of been forced to play a lot of defense this year, and I would love to see more offense played. And that's the only way that we're going to be able to move forward over the next couple of years. And then obviously, as mentioned, the deficit that's been talked about, we're going to have to just do our best to combat that deficit the best we can, as we've done over the past 4 years, as far as I'm concerned. Looking at ways to just be more efficient. So those are kind of the things that are top priority for me. And I know that Diane and Jim kind of alluded to all those same things as well.
Thank you. And finally, Dr. Dolan.
I think that, first we need to acknowledge that our entire community has been phenomenally impacted in ways that we can both verbalize and maybe don't even appreciate yet. And really, it's going to be over the last 18 months when we think about the fall and not just about today. I think we've done a great job of getting through it and getting through it together. Our district is certainly resilient. And I think that's one of those elements that I think we really can highlight as we go forward, as Jim alluded and others, about executing that strategic plan. I do think that one of the priorities will be mental health, and that is for all the members of our education community. And that's from our teachers to our staff, bus drivers, everybody. Our students also. There's a tremendous amount of stigma in our society about mental health. And I think that one of the priorities may be for District 34 to be able to enable the communication and enable the support for our entire education community in a way that, frankly, is going to be a challenge. But I think it's a challenge that we should be willing to rise to. The financial discussion, and particularly those of the pre-pandemic commitments, notably the referendum and the construction and operations expansion projects, are certainly going to be a key priority. And then ultimately, I think broadening our equity and our opportunity initiatives is an opportunity. And while we all haven't had the same experience during the pandemic, we need to be sensitive to our shared experience coming out of this pandemic.
Thank you very much. This concludes the question portion of today's forum. We will now accept your closing statements, and this will be in the reverse order of your opening statements. So we'll start with Ms. Stefani.
Thank you. I love our Glenview community, and I would like to do what I can to help keep our schools strong. I feel as though our current board has started very important work, and I would like to see that work to completion. As a current board member, I'm aware that I should not, and I do not represent any particular area, interest, or group. I work for the welfare of all of our students in the district, and I base decisions on what is best for the entire community. I also feel as though there's a bit of a learning curve involved in being a board member, and I now have some valuable experience in that role, and that has led me to my decision to run. I've been very fortunate to learn from my talented peers on the board, as well as from some peers that have moved on from the board. I have a deep respect for all of those peers. Also, as an attorney, I ask questions for a living, and I resolve disputes, and that has come in handy as a board member. I have also helped defend schools in litigation. I think that gives me a bit of a unique perspective. I would bring my experience as someone who looks deeply into issues. I would try to continue to learn from other board members and from the community and from teachers and staff as much as I can. I would seek to work collaboratively with the rest of the board to strengthen and support our schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Baumstark.
First, I would just like to say that I'd be happy to serve on the board with any of my fellow forum participants today. I believe there are no wrong choices that our voters can make in this election. With that said, I would like to highlight what I think the community gets with me having continued my service on the board for another 4-year term. First, I would say you get a passionate and engaged board member that is heavily invested in education and the community. In terms of, I've mentioned my career change in education and all the things I've done with Glenview. Second, I think I bring a broad perspective that reflects my professional and leadership experience, both in the educational realm and the finance realm, both of which are important for a school board. Third, I see myself as an analytical and reflective strategic thinker that craves and seeks data to support my decision making. So I guess what I'm saying is you get a thoughtful decision maker that's trying to have it, to the extent possible, have things based on data that can be found to support decisions. And finally, I think I bring an even temperament and a collaborative mindset, which values healthy debate and then seeks to understand the perspective and needs of really all of our constituents: teachers, administrators, parents, non-parent community members, and actually most importantly, students. So I just wanted to say thank you again to my fellow forum participants and the League of Women Voters for today.
Thank you. Dr. Dolan.
I think this has been a tremendous opportunity, and I want to thank the league. I want to thank all of my fellow panelists. I was asked the other day, why are you running, and what would be the 3 words that describe why? And to me, the words that kind of jumped right away were commitment, curiosity, and equity. My family's been here a long time. I brought my family back here. There's certainly a tremendous pride that I have to be able to have my children in the district. And it goes without saying that I appreciate all of the work that the boards have done and will continue to do going forward. Being a board member requires commitment. It requires focus. And while all of us are not solely board members, it's a volunteer position. And that to me needs to be number one. First and foremost, that all of us are committed to the success of our schools and our community. To the curiosity, I think asking questions and asking leading questions, and then taking those questions and asking a different question to make sure that we're getting to the right answer for the diversity that exists in our community is an opportunity. Diane mentioned that she asks questions for a living, as do I. And it's a phenomenal thing to be able to bring that to a board such as ours. And I think equity, the broad socioeconomic and ethnic and racial diversity within our community highlight the opportunities to ask questions and make sure that we are meeting the needs of all of our students, even if some of the solutions are tailored, meeting the needs of our families and meeting the needs of our teaching and teaching professionals in ways that maybe we haven't had to consider before, but now we have an opportunity to going forward.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Jones.
As I stated earlier, my promise to the voters is that I will continue to do my best to represent and listen to all constituents. The decisions and issues that are brought to the school board have a heavy impact on the community. I will continue to stand up for the children and what I believe is best for them. And as my record shows, I'm not afraid to stand alone. I am proud of the work that we have accomplished thus far as a board, but we have a long road ahead. And I personally have more to give to District 34. We are finishing up year 2 of a 5-year strategic plan. We are in the middle of major construction on all 8 of our buildings, thanks to the passage of the $119 million referendum. And we have and will continue to have an achievement gap that we need to confront. I have the ideas, the time, and the experience to help with these wide-ranging issues. The diversity of the board is critical. And as a woman, a mother of young children, and a former teacher, I believe that I'm a much needed voice on the District 34 Board of Education. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all candidates for joining us today. We will be broadcasting this live. I think Susan tell you exactly when that will be available, and you can point your constituents in our way and they can watch this forum at their leisure.